Thank you very much. Let me ask a couple of questions. Mr. Sunday, I want to first start with you talking about tax policy on this. Europe and Germany in particular is losing some of its energy independence of late by trying to be more dependent on Russia and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline for natural gas. That's going to be an enormous geopolitical shift. That'll be a very long-term effect on Western Europe. We in the United States started exporting natural gas half a decade ago, specifically dealing with the geopolitical importance of that and to also deal with the carbon issues of trying to be able to reduce carbon usage around the world by using cleaner natural gas around the world for energy. So geopolitically, it's important. Otherwise, it's important as well. The reason I want to be able to drill down on that, one of the key issues being the intangible drilling costs on that, which are just normal operating costs for oil and gas and for their production. There's been conversation about that. Mr. Sunny, what would that mean to lose intangible drilling costs, both geopolitically for us and our energy independence domestically, as well as just in tax policy?
Thanks for the question, Senator. It would incredibly disadvantage the producers that are still able to operate here in Pennsylvania. That would translate to reduced production, fewer jobs. We'd see a reduction in the LNG exports to countries, as you mentioned, in Southeast Asia, India. It would increase their geopolitical risk and our ability to shrug off geopolitical turmoil in the Gulf.
So let me ask the same type of question. Enhanced oil recovery has been a process that's been around for a while. It's been very important to actually reduce our footprint. Sunday, do you want to be able to do any additional details on enhanced oil recovery, what that could mean for continuing to be able to reduce our carbon footprint?
Sure. I think if the goal is reduced emissions, you want to get the most molecules out of the ground with the least surface activity possible. So that's certainly something that we would want to continue to support if that's our goal.
Okay. Thank you for both of those. Mr. Brill, I want to ask you a little bit about the wind production tax credit. And the issue is not whether we should engage in wind. Wind is a great source of energy around the country. It's an effective piece of energy when the wind is actually blowing to be able to engage in that. My question is, we still continue to put billions of dollars into the wind production tax credit as a specific set aside to incentive new construction on that. It obviously changes the formula of the price for wind compared to everything else. But it seems to be something that should be fading. There's lots of great wind production out there. It's very efficient. We're doing it the same way, though, that we've done it for now 30 years. Is it effective to continue to do the same credit over and over again, even when wind is no longer a startup entity?
Thanks for the question, Senator. It is true that the technology has advanced by leaps and bounds over the next few decades, and the price of wind energy has plummeted over the same period of time. Depending on how one does the calculations, it is often cost competitive even without the subsidies. The subsidies, of course, further encourage additional investment and additional deployment of a carbon neutral source of energy, and there are climate and economic advantages to that. But continuing a strategy of large subsidies for all clean energy will become increasingly costly over time as we continue the transition towards lower carbon emissions. And so therefore, the cost of these policies, I think, should be carefully examined.
Thank you. Mr. Pope, I want to be able to ask you specifically about an issue that I don't think you were directly affected by, but 2 months ago, obviously we had a really deep cold snap that came across the central part of the United States. I was in that. Southwest Power Pool had a pretty dramatic shift during that time period as we saw a lot of wind towers that froze up. Our solar panels were all covered in deep snow. A lot of our natural gas facilities that were actually doing gas processing froze up in the central part of the United States. We had a pretty dramatic set of issues there, and it seemed to cascade. Part of the challenges we're trying to be able to go through is to continue to be able to focus on energy diversity. Some of the tax incentives, when you put those in place, obviously capital run towards where they're going to get the greatest return. That's been wind, that's been other things, which again, in my part of the country in Oklahoma, the wind comes sweeping down the plain and we actually turn wind towers with it and make energy out of it. It's been great as a source. But the question becomes over-reliance, and on peak days, what that really means to have an over-reliance. How can tax policy actually push us in our energy diversity area that we create some areas and undersupply others, and so on peak days, hot and cold, we miss that out? How do you balance that out in your own portfolio?
Thank you very much for the question. And first of all, In Oregon and across the Pacific Northwest, we saw tremendous weather, particularly the last 2 weeks of February. And in Portland in general, in particular, we had more than half of our customers out of power during that time. And I spent time speaking with Chairman Wyden as well as many others in getting that power restored. One of the things that did not happen during the significant ice, wind, and snowstorms in our part of the country is the generation continued to produce, whether that be wind, whether that be solar, whether that be hydro, or whether that be thermal resources. One of the reasons for that is that those resources are all constructed for the weather conditions that we have in the Pacific Northwest on the hottest days of the year and on the very, very coldest days of the year. The storms that we were impacted by were probably 1 in 40-year events. So I am very aware of the reliability issues and the problems for all of our customers and community members and your constituents when there's not power, particularly during a pandemic. As we look forward to how do we incent diversity across all of our resources, it's something we feel very strongly about, and it's one of the reasons that we really like the tech neutral aspects of Chairman Wyden's proposals, and most importantly, that all participants, utilities and independent power producers alike, can participate. And thirdly, I'd say that to balance renewables, wind, solar, hydro, as well as others, Portland General, as well as many utilities in the West, belong to the energy imbalance market. And we work with each other to lower the cost of renewables, to be able to use the max amount of renewables across a much wider geography, the entire West. So through a variety of mechanisms, I think there's a real opportunity to expand the use of renewables in a reliable and low-cost fashion. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.